Beyond the Mic with Sean Dillon.
We're joined on the star line by a recovering attorney. He took those years of experience in front of a judge, turned it into a series of books starring the down-on-his-luck Burr Lafayette, including the new one, Bare Bones, Murder at Sleeping Bear Dunes. We welcome author Charles Cutter.
Thank you, Sean.
Let's go beyond the mic. 43 years of practicing law after getting your Juris Doctor from Michigan, your BA from Michigan State, majoring in English and finance, and a graduate of Waverly High School. How did those years of experience help you create Burr Lafayette?
Contrary to what some people think, I'm not Burr. My behavior is almost always way better than his, but there's some probably some similarities. One of the similarities is that we both went to the University of Michigan Law School. It's sort of a snobby law school, and a bunch of my classmates down there don't like it that there's a down-on-his-luck U of M attorney who's the protagonist in these courtroom dramas. I didn't practice law for all that long. I practiced it long enough to know that I wasn't going to be that good at it, and both me and the profession would be better if I were doing something else. But I did learn an awful lot about, trial practice and legal procedure and the ins and outs of the practice of law, which I think hopefully comes through in these books, because there's always some, legal ins and outs. Burr's personal life is kind of a mess, but he's a brilliant lawyer, and he usually finds a way, to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. And so I think the law part of my background really helped write these books.
Now, when you were a lawyer, your specialization was what?
Well, I was actually intrigued with trial practice, and then, I did a little bit of that, and the part that everybody sees on TV and the part that's romanticized, and probably the part that I romanticize, is, the lawyer is gunslinger in the courtroom. And it's not really like that. I mean, it is once you get that far, but I think well over 95% of all cases are settled. And that's the way the system's designed, because it's very expensive to try a case, whether it's criminal or civil. So the system's designed to get these things to settle. So there's all kinds of research that's done, all kinds of sort of in the office stuff that I thought was really boring. And I wasn't really good at that part. I'm probably a little too outgoing and possibly a little too ADD to be able to sit there and do all that. So that was the part that helped me decide that we'd all be better off if I was doing something else.
You believe in the old school power of the yellow legal pad. How has writing and editing on the yellow pad freed you?
Well, it's freed me in the sense that, so here's what I do. Or this is what I started to do after the first couple books. I knew about how long I wanted them to be. So I went, to Staples and I bought 25 yellow pads and I put them on the corner of my desk. And when those pads were filled up, the book was done. And that kind of really helped focus me, so I didn't get, too long-winded about things. And it also allowed me to take that yellow pad anywhere I wanted, and I could work on the book. So once that was done, though, then I do the editing on a computer. But it's really been liberating, I think, for me to write on a yellow pad, because I can scratch things off. If I get mad, I can crumple up the piece of paper and throw it away. And it's really allowed me to be portable. So that, I think that part really helps. It's also, I've read this, it's easier to be creative on writing by hand than on a computer. I don't know if that's true, but I think it's true for me.
We're talking to author Charles Cutter beyond the mic. Burr has transformed from the series The Fool's Errand to The Pink Pony to The Gray Drake and now Bare Bones, Murder at Sleeping Bear Dunes. What subtle changes has Burr undergone over these books?
I would say that now he's not quite such a one-man band. He has a partner, Jacob Wertheim, and a long-standing, long-suffering legal assistant, Eve McGinty, and they're more prominent characters than they used to be, and he leans on them for more, and they're a bigger part of the book. The other thing, I think maybe the biggest thing is, in the first book, he was coming off a marriage that by his own admission he ruined. The first book really deals with that. Subsequent books, especially this one, there's more of a romantic interest, and he lost his practice and his marriage because of this disastrous affair, and now he's slightly he's in the process of putting his life back together, sort of. So I think that's the progression that we're seeing. I don't think he's anywhere near ready to get remarried, but he is ready to, I think, have a relationship.
You use Northern Michigan as an additional character, with every location as detailed from a man who's lived there all his life. Why was using Northern Michigan area important to you?
Well, probably the first thing, which is the old writers saw, is they'll write what you know about, and I certainly knew about that, and so that made a big difference. I'm also, though, I spend a lot of time outdoors, and I love being outdoors, and I wanted to make the settings really part of the book. A lot of books, which are fine books, could really take place anywhere. These books really, I think, are central to Northern Michigan in particular, and you really get a sense of place with it. They've been called brutal murders in beautiful places. There's usually something special about all of the settings for these books, and I get a lot of comments from people either who live in Michigan who say, "Boy, you know what? I've been there, and that's just how it was." And then once in a while, somebody says, "I've been there, and you really need to fix this." And I get a lot of people who aren't from Michigan who say, "Geez, I never knew that's what Michigan was like." I think the setting really helps tell the story, especially in bare bones.
Burr is such an unusual character. He is almost very awkward. It's just so interesting that he prefers sailboats and his dog rather than courtrooms and clients. And courtrooms and clients almost seems a nuisance. They almost seem to be something that he has to long suffer through so he can enjoy sailboats and dogs.
Yeah, I'd say that's right. I also think that he's might be mildly depressed, and he's a little bit of I use this in the book. He's sort of a man at loose ends and hasn't really quite found himself after what happened at this big law firm he was at. So some of that, I think, is probably a little bit of his being lost. Some of it is the fact that he does love to do these things. And then on the other hand, he has this great gift in the courtroom, and he does have bills to pay. So I think it's a combination of all those things.
What litigators, judges, fellow attorneys that you've known that have continued to practice help you develop Burr's legal opponents and the situations that he has faced?
Well, I've been either partners or adversaries with a bunch of really good lawyers, and then also had, when I needed it, some really good lawyers represent me. And I probably shouldn't name names, but there are some of these characters are certainly drawn, at least in part, from real life people. And I would say that the best lawyers that I know have this real dogged pursuit. And I like to tell you it's a pursuit of the truth, but it's really, and maybe it is, but it's also this pursuit of victory. They're really, really intense, driven, competitive people. And there's a bunch of lawyers like this in here, and a number of judges. And you don't have to be a big city lawyer to be a great lawyer or a great judge. And I think there's some of that, hopefully, in all these books.
Charles Cutter is the author. Bare Bones, Murder at Sleeping Bear Dunes is the book, and he joins us beyond the mic. Who is more curious, you or your character Burr?
Oh, I'm pretty curious. I'd probably have to say that I'm curious. I get people sometimes get annoyed because I ask too many questions about things, trying to find out what's going on. Burr's pretty curious, but I'm probably more curious. But he drinks more than I do.
Now, my sister is a recovering attorney like you. Why do you think lawyers get a bad rap?
Well, they get a bad rap probably for a couple reasons, but, you know, one of which is that they're representing their clients and they're trying to win. And, you know, they do things to win that sometimes they're largely within the rules. Maybe sometimes they aren't, but they're really, you know, as I said earlier, they're sort of the tip of the iceberg because they're representing their client's wishes. And without a client, a lawyer wouldn't be doing what they're doing. So they're really the spear, you know, and the spear has a point on it, and the point can do damage. So I think, you know, 99% of the lawyers that I know or have dealt with are really terrific people. But like in every other profession, there are some people that just are kind of sleazy and unsavory, and that's just how it is. they're also sort of showmen, and a bunch of the litigators are, and they kind of, I don't know that it's a bad rap, but they're standing out in front of the whole world to see. Sometimes their worst characteristics are on display.
How have you spent this quarantine period? Have you been writing more books? Have you been more hiding? Have you been spending time with your wife, cats, and dogs?
I think at the very beginning, I don't know that I was in hiding, or our family was, but we certainly were kind of reclusive. And I had an office that's like, if I have to stop at the stop sign, it's 4 minutes. If it's not, if I don't have to stop, it's 2 minutes. But I worked at home, and one of the things that came out of this was I don't really need that office. So I gave that office up. I'd say we've been careful. I have spent more time with my wife, cats, and dogs. One of our kids is at home right now because he's getting a master's at Michigan State, which is pretty much right across it. You could throw a paper airplane to Michigan State from where we live. So I spent more time with everybody. No one's killed anybody yet. I think probably for around here, it's been helpful that it was sort of spring and summer so we could all, be outside. I would say that, this terrible pandemic sort of caused me to kind of examine, probably a lot of people examine parts of their life and what they're doing and what's important and what isn't.
Well, time's running out, so it's time for the Rocking 8. 8 random questions. Answer with the first thing that comes to your mind. There is no pressure. If it pleases the court.
Okay.
Largest fish that you've caught fly fishing?
Steelhead.
How big was it?
It was 11 pounds on a fly rod, but my son caught one that was 16.
You've graduated from both places, Michigan and Michigan State. If the two are playing, who do you root for?
Michigan State.
Would you ever consider litigating a case you lost in real life as a Burr Lafayette mystery?
I think if I disguised it enough, I might. And there's a number of them that were losers. But I think there's some sort of attorney-client privilege and privacy there. I just have to make sure I was very careful about disguising everything. And you know what? None of my cases were as interesting as Burr's.
Favorite breed of dog?
Boy, that's a tough. I'd have to say a Labrador Retriever, but English Setters. I don't want my English Setter to hear that, but English Setter is close behind.
Shh, I won't tell. Favorite place to write?
Kitchen table.
Your character Burr Lafayette said, quote, I spent all my money on boats, booze, and women. The rest I wasted, unquote. Where have you spent most of your money on?
Well, I'd say I've been happily married for a long time. Probably boats, dogs, fishing, and also my wife.
Okay, so what was the last gift you gave your wife?
My wife is a master gardener, and she loves gardening, and she has more plants than I can even begin to name. But I bought her. Well, I gave her the money to buy the plants that she wanted for her garden.
Now, growing up, did you want to be a lawyer?
Well, I started out. My family were all engineers, and I started out in college as an engineering student. I lasted one day, and then I decided that was another good thing for me not to do. And then I thought about medicine, and then science really wasn't my thing either. So I, gravitated to the liberal arts. And I never really wanted to practice law, but I wanted to go to law school. And believe it or not, at the time, I could earn almost enough money in the summer to pay for law school. So it was a pretty easy choice. Most of my time I spent in the media business after practicing law.
He always roots for Michigan State. The largest fish he's caught fly fishing was a steelhead. And his latest book, Bare Bones: Murder at Sleeping Bear Dunes, is available now. We thank author Charles Cutter for joining us today.
Thanks, Sean. It was a pleasure.
And that, my friends, is Beyond the Mic.